Welcome, everybody. Another episode of the After Action Report featuring our own Greg Noll. How are you, sir?
I am doing fine. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Fantastic. You're coming on the Shirt Tales, not Shirt Tales. You're on your own. I love this.
He's got his own shirt.
We've had some amazing guests on, and you're continuing that tradition. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much for the invite. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? Give us a little background on who you are.
Well, if you try and Google the name Greg Noll, I'm not the surfboard guy. So if you're a surfer, there's a guy named Greg Noll who was nicknamed the Bull, who was quite the surfer. So no relationship.
So the name is pretty powerful across multiple industries, huh? You got the Bull of surfing and the Bull of Hazmat.
Yeah. Probably the one ads as well. So, well, I'm probably a lot like most of our other peers. I'm a third generation firefighter. I grew up 2 houses away from the fire station my dad worked at. That was in Reading, Pennsylvania, or if you played Monopoly and thought you were riding the Reading Railroad, it's actually the Reading Railroad. But yeah, I started out, graduated from high school in 1970, had nothing to do with the fire service for the next 2 years. And then in the summer, I was home and I played on the softball team for one of the fire stations. And that got me into the station and the guys. And a couple months later, I told my dad that I was quitting college and I was going into service into the Air Force, because that was the quickest way I could get hired as a firefighter. And it gave me my veterans points in the civil service process. So interesting to say that I still remember that conversation with my dad, because he was not a happy camper by any stretch. But many years when he was close to passing, we had a conversation and he said, I didn't think you were making the right decision, but you had a plan and you carried out your plan and it worked. So that was it meant a lot to me that he recognized that. He recognized it long before, but for him to say that. But,
I have a very sort of similar story. My father was not happy that I was trying for FDNY. He thought I should go to college, finish college, and do other stuff. And that was so. I hear you, and now he's very thankful that I went on the path that I am. So I can absolutely 100% feel your pain on going through all that.
But, in terms of some people work in the same location for all their careers, I kind of jumped around. There's this umbrella that says Hildebrand and Noll Associates, Mike Hildebrand and I. But underneath that umbrella, there were a lot of silos. I had the opportunity. I did Fed USAR for about 17 years with Pennsylvania Task Force 1. Volleyed, do a lot of incident management team work where I live here in Pennsylvania. As it was our own firm, there are not many people who have the background that we do. And so we got to work on a lot of pretty neat projects. We both had clearances, so that took us into some organizations that you normally don't deal with. So it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. But I think most importantly, I had the opportunity to fail. I worked for people who not that they allowed you to fail, but, failure is part of life. And sometimes you make it, sometimes you don't. It's when you have failure repetitively that becomes a problem. And so, it's not like in today's world where there's a single sanction. We have this high bar that society expects of us, but
I had officers that wouldn't allow me to fail, but I did it anyway.
Yeah.
He really pushed through.
I pushed through that barrier.
So I mean, like the reason why, and I know we say this in every show, but it's an important part of it is that we see the opportunity to, you know, even for a short time, pick the brains of the guys that were there setting it up in the beginning, and guys like yourself, Mike Callen, and Rick Emery, and Phil McArdle, and the list goes on and on. Next month is going to be Bill Hand. We're really trying to understand a lot of where things came from, like what we're doing currently came from a tragedy or a best practice or something gleaned in a class or something like that. And the lessons that me and Mike are personally learning doing these interviews is incredible. And I know, people, they're gonna be putting comments in it. It'll be up on the screen. We'll talk about them. But like, we're really interested in finding out like what it was like back in the day.
Yeah. Well, I would just offer, you got some heavy hitters on that short list that you did. But if you said, Greg, you only can pick one guy and in all your interactions throughout your career, who would that guy be? And it would be Bill Hand. In my mind, Bill Hand is probably the most street smart individual in our business. Longtime friend, a willingness to share information, but yeah, great guy.
So what got you into Hazmat? Like, you worked so hard to get on the fire department. What then kind of attracted you to the Hazmat world?
Well, that's easy. I like going to fires, and Hazmat at that time was just going to bigger fires because it was primarily flammable liquids and flammable gases. So,
okay.
I wasn't like Mike Callen where I had this shattering event that impacted my psyche. I just like going to fires. So.
I love that because I mean, like, because the whole operation was different back then. I mean, like, I'm assuming, I think you were there in the beginning, like, which is like the early to mid '80s.
Yeah, actually, if you go in the Wayback Machine, I took my first Hazmat instructor's course probably around 77, 78. And it was it was an NFPA project that was funded by DOT. And it was a series of slide programs. And I will tell you, for people who worked in that generation, there was never any slide program that had more slides stolen from it and put into other programs in violation of copyright laws than ever existed. So, because, we used to joke, we said, Callen especially, we would joke and say, all instructors are created equal. Some just have better slides than others.
Well, one of our things is to take from one is called plagiarism, but to take from many is called research.
Right.
There's really nothing new out there.
We have a throwback design on one of the new shirts that has the old school slides on it, and it says at the bottom, "Stop looking at my slides."
Well, I'll tell you, you talk about good days and bad days, particularly as an instructor, but one of the most challenging times I was teaching a class and I had a slide get jammed. And I had another guy who was an instructor get to the slide tray before I did. And he proceeded to unjam it and then drop all my slides onto the floor.
So for those that are out there listening, let me ask this question for them. How do PowerPoint slides drop on the floor? Like, do they just fall out of the computer? What exactly are you referring to?
So, well, there are these little pictures, and we used to put them in a tray, and it was the best we had at the time. But to be honest with you guys, I go back to when I first started, there you are, rocking and rolling. When I took my first instructor's course, if you had overhead transparencies, you were hot shit. If you had colored transparencies that folded over and built, you were really hot shit. So
there was a guy when I started, there was a guy that had an overhead projector, and he had not only just the transparencies, but he had like a little reel. And so he would crank it, and it was one enormous paper of this.
I had teachers in
times.
college that would use that. Yep,
Yeah.
100%.
Oh, with the wet erase markers, and yeah, I remember those things with all the overlays. You could put all the overlays on top.
Well, I was fortunate. I started in Reading and I worked there for about 3 years. And then I kind of had a bug, not feeding my ego, but I was asking the question, well, could I do this anywhere else? And so Iowa State University, which was the state fire training organization at that time, they were hiring instructors. And so I wasn't looking to leave. I put in an application. They invited me out for an interview and offered me a job. And, I came back and originally I was going to take it. And then I, changed my mind. But ultimately, I was getting beat up at work one particular day. And it was like, I don't need this anymore. So I went to Iowa State University. I stayed there for 3 years. I would say I worked for a couple guys, but in the fire behavior, fire chemistry world, one of the guys I worked for was Keith Royer, who was one of the fathers of the Iowa formula, which we know on the suppression side. And I also had the opportunity to work on my master's while I was there. But it was, man, I owe so much to them for taking a chance on me, let me fail a couple times, but really giving me the opportunity. Pretty much Hazmat as we know it. I was teaching what we would call ops today, but then I was also teaching a college class in hazardous materials. And so, you look back at your career and there are certain things that happen and certain people that you look back to. I was blessed to have that opportunity at Iowa State University.
That's great.
So you went to Iowa State and you were teaching hazmat. Where did all your information and knowledge come from? Like, how did you obtain it? Because there wasn't regulations, there wasn't textbooks to open up. Like, so what is the process of somebody who's, I like more fire, let me go down this route, to having just a tremendous wealth of knowledge that universities want to pull from? Like, how do you get from A to B?
Well, that's a great question, and it's an indirect route, and with a lot of bumps in it. But to be honest with you, this might sound kind of, I don't know, doesn't fit, but I'm pretty good in hazmat response, but I don't have a strong background in chemistry. And I've always viewed hazmat response in the same way I view fire suppression. For example, in structural firefighting, it's not fire chemistry, it's fire behavior that really influences what you do. And it's the relationship between that behavior, between the fire and the structure. And the same thing is true in my mind in hazardous materials. It's all about the juice in the can. There are other factors that come along. But you don't have to be good in chemistry to be good in hazmat response.
No.
Now, to be fair, being good in chemistry can make you better or well-rounded in hazmat response. But all things being equal, I think street chemistry is a lot more important than some of the other elements that we get into. So,
so how did you? Was it just response? Were you guys just doing so many different things and learning as you go along and putting all those lessons in your back pocket? Did you start taking formal classes on things that sort of related to hazmat, but there weren't any hazmat really classes, but you're like, oh, this kind of connects. Let me take this and see if I can plug it in.
There weren't a lot of hazmat people, or there weren't a lot of hazmat training courses that were out there, but there was a group of folks just like me who were looking at and asking the same questions. And over time, we connected. So if we go 1979, I'm teaching at Iowa State University. We have the summer fire school, a guy named Doug Williams, who worked for the Brady Company, which Brady's big book is Emergency Care, if you go back in the Wayback Machine. So Doug comes to the summer fire school at the Iowa State University. He was a volley in Prince George's County. I was a volley in Prince George's County going back into the 70s when I was stationed at Andrews. So we connected. We had mutual friends. Well, 3 months later, the IFC Hazmat conference is in Kansas City. Another guy from the Brady Company was a guy named Jim Yavora, who's, I would hope you recognize Jimmy's name for Yavora Leadership Development and the thing that we've done. So I meet Jimmy in Kansas City. Jimmy introduces me to Mike Hildebrand. And Mike says, we connect. And it was like, you're teaching Hazmat too? He said, what are you teaching? And I told him, I said, well, to be honest, I found this stuff by Benner and I really like it. I'm really taken to it. And Mike was in classes that were taught by Benner. So now Benner's becoming like, we're going to the Holy Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
So Mike and I just connected right off the bat because of that. Number one, the shared background, but number two, there wasn't a lot of other stuff out there, you know? So I a neat story, a couple years later when I'm jumping around a little bit here in terms of timelines, but in the 80s, I'm volleying in Prince George County and I'm working at the American Petroleum Institute and I'm an adjunct at the National Fire Academy. The Fire Academy is doing their first Hazmat course and it's entitled Hazmat Incident Analysis. It's based on Benner's stuff. I get hired to help Ludi write the course. Now stop and think about this. This is, I'm getting to go to the Holy Mountain and learn from him. And so I worked at API every Wednesday for about 3 months. I would go down to the Department of Transportation where Ludi worked at NTSB, and I would go home with Ludi, have dinner at his house, and then we would go down in his basement and work on this course. I mean, you talk about just being, what an opportunity, to go. I jokingly say go to the mountain and listen to the God, but man, Ludi was such an inspiration. And where Mike comes into play was Mike and another guy named Charlie Wright. They were the translators of Ludi's information. So Ludi was an engineer, a graduate of Carnegie Mellon, but he wasn't an emergency responder. But that's where Mike and Charlie came in because they kind of, okay, Ludi, we take these core principles and we relate them back to how does this apply in doing what we do in hazmat response, particularly in terms of incident analysis. Funny story, you might have heard this from Mike Hildebrand in one of our previous things, but Ludi's having a conversation with Frank Brannigan. Brannigan's the coordinator at that time of the fire science curriculum at Montgomery College in Montgomery County, Maryland. And they're having this conversation and they're talking about all these hazmat incidents, which are primarily flammable gases. They're Levy scenarios. And Ludi says something to the effect of Brannigan that, well, you're teaching your people to do things that are getting them killed. Well, Ludi's not an emergency responder. You can imagine what Brannigan's, that's like an inside ball. That's a brushback pitch. And Brannigan says, well, if you know so damn much about what we're doing, why don't you come and teach the course? And that led to Ludi coming to Montgomery College and teaching the initial hazardous materials college courses in which were attended by Mike Hildebrand and Charlie Wright. And I got involved because I found a book in 1978 that Ludi had bought or he had developed. And I saw it somewhere in one of the fire magazines. So that's how I got his stuff. But, what a guy. In my mind, you talk about risk-based response in today's world. Ludi's work is the foundation for what we do to get to today in risk-based response, in my opinion.
I agree. And after studying a bunch of his stuff, I personally feel like we're, as instructors in an instructor base, we're moving away from the core principles of that. Not that the actions move away from the core principles, but we're failing to teach it on a technician level in the beginning so people have it as a foundation of their knowledge. Like the actions that they're being taught are based upon it, but they're not learning as from like a core point, like why are we doing what we're doing? Well, we're doing it because of his principles.
Yeah, I think, I think this is a societal issue. It's not limited just to our world, but I see there's a target-rich environment to do things in terms of critical thinking. We have so many people who are coming in the doors who are based on, you look at all the tools that are available to you online and so forth. But what they lack in some instances is critical decision making, critical thinking, how to analyze a problem, and look at the hazards and risks associated in that. One of the other hats I've been wearing the last couple of years is I've been asked to facilitate the National Hazmat Roundtable, and one of the things that we talked about in the roundtable is maybe looking at the development of a curriculum, much like we use in NIMS, but applied to risk-based response. In other words, there's a 100 level competency, there's 200 level competencies, there's 300 level competencies. And I think that ties into your comment, Mike, about trying to get it in as a foundational element and then build and expand upon it.
No, and this is something that Phil McArdle was talking about, and especially Rick Emery. Rick Emery was a lot on this one, is that, in the beginning, there really wasn't any standards or best practices. It was kind of like just a compilement of things that we didn't get killed with.
Well, I did that and I lived.
Yeah, don't touch that, so I mean, in the beginning, OSHA was the only thing, and that didn't start until like the mid 70s. So NFPA, where from your point of view, where did the rules come from?
Okay, so let's go into the decade of the 80s. About 1985, there's two organizations write a letter to the NFPA Standards Council requesting that NFPA develop standards for hazardous materials emergency response. Those two letters, one letter came from IFSTA, Fire Protection Publications, and it was written by Gene Carlson, another well-known, well-respected person in our profession. There's another guy that I was fortunate to get to know early in my career and was a mentor. The second letter was written by myself, and it went under the letterhead of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. It was signed by Ed McCormick, who was the executive director. But those two letters were sent to NFPA, and NFPA, in turn, the Standards Council approved the development of what we know today as NFPA 470 and the other standards. Not necessarily related with this was an effort by OSHA to develop standards for hazmat response. And the two guys who were involved in that were Tom Seymour and Mike Moore. Tom Seymour was a senior instructor at the University of Maryland, was an FPE graduate of Maryland, and a well-known fire instructor in the Maryland fire community. Mike Moore was a volley up in Carroll County. So they came to some of our NFPA meetings and essentially took what they were hearing in our world and used that as the baseline for what we know as 1910-120. So that's why, for example, when that first edition, when 1910-120 finally comes out on the street, the one difference between it and NFPA is that the first edition, the first generation of the NFPA standards had the hazmat specialist level on it. The second edition, it went away, and you can go down that rabbit hole, but it was essentially the committee came to the conclusion that when we did a task analysis, there wasn't a hell of a lot of difference between what we expected of a technician and what we expected of a specialist. But it was already in the proposed rulemaking from OSHA. So that's kind of why there's that difference in that regard. So that's a long question or a long response to a simple question. It started with, if you ask the chicken and the egg, NFPA is the chicken. They laid the egg. OSHA ran with it.
And how long did that process take? Chris wants to know.
Oh, I would say our meeting started about 85, 86. And the first NFPA standard came on the street in approximately 90.
That's crazy.
And you know, someone say, well, that's a long time. Well, you know, standards writing is a full contact sport. And it's a lot easier to say we're going to do it than it is to actually do it.
Yeah, like I imagine you guys all get in the same room for the first time and it's like, all right, what do we talk about?
Well,
how does that ball get rolling? Right.
So you guys know I chaired the committee for 10 years. I'm one of the original plank holders along with Charlie Wright. So I got a pretty good perspective of the history, but I lost my train of thought. That's what happens when you're an old guy. But
that's why we're recording this.
Yeah, don't worry.
You can go and review it and you can go right back on the train.
But you know, when I chaired the committee, there's this process, and the first thing is it's a full contact sport. The second thing is that it's like sometimes it's herding cats, and you go through this process. And step one is like their denial, which is you open up the gate, let them run out, run around, beat up on each other, and then come back and say, okay, you got that out of your system. Now let's start to get and build upon it. And again, you know, I've heard people say over the years, well, what you said here, that's just bullshit. It's not like that. To which my response is, if you think you got a better idea, submit it to the committee. Because you got to get 2/3 of the numbers, whatever the committee number is. Historically, it's been 35 members, 20 some. You need to get something passed. Now the committee's up pushing 50 plus. But again, you know, you might think that it's stupid or you might disagree, but you got to be able to articulate and sway your peers with your position.
I would think that it's, you know, like, the guys that are coming into that committee are probably a big deal wherever they're from. But now you're sitting around a table with 50 guys that are big deals from wherever they come from. And so they walk in there thinking, when I speak, like either E.F. Hutton, when I speak, everybody shuts up and listens to me. And these guys are like, sit down. You don't, like, that's a dumb idea.
But you know, the contrary of that is, and I'll take Eversole as an example, because when you look at some of the leadership in the committee today, some of those came on when John was the chair, and I took over from John, I think in 2007. But John made it clear, as all the chairs have, that just because you're new on the committee doesn't mean that your input is not sought and is not important. And if you have a question, if you have pushback, you know, put it out there. That's the only way you're going to get better. And one of the other things that Rick Ettinger is working on now is trying to come up with, we have so many new people, is having kind of a mentorship process to bring them along.
All right, so you've got all these people, you're saying it's about a 2/3 majority vote. I can imagine that throughout your time in developing the standards and working in the hazmat world, you weren't always on the 2/3 side vote. So what is some of the more nonsensical rules or practices that you've encountered throughout your hazmat career? Like, what have you sat and you've gone, oh man, that was really stupid. I can't believe they went in that direction.
I'm trying to, there's the one issue that we made a decision and it seemed like the right decision. Oh, I know what it was. It was getting rid of was it 475? It was one of the standards that was a recommended practice. And in the cycle, every time it was always like the last thing we would get to. And so we were rushing, we were bastardizing it. And then we would never get any comments anyway. So it raised the question, well, why are we doing this? So that was a decision that made sense at the time. I think you'll find committee members who were on the committee at that time would probably say, nah, we blew it. But we have corrected that, because with the current 475 standard, a lot of that stuff has been able to come back in, because 475 is a program management recommended practice. So
that's great. I would imagine there's going to be a lot of dumb ideas. I mean, like, that box is, you're going to turn it over on a table and just shake out all the paper out of it and be like, that's dumb. That's stupid.
well, you know, though, and that's where sometimes time takes care of that, but it's good to give you an example. We had, when I was chair, we had a representative from another technical committee come in, and they were arguing a point that this dealt with certification issues. And we were clearly diametrically opposed in terms of the positions of their committee versus our committee. And you know, we heard him out, and I just said, well, I think that you should expect that there'll be some strong pushback from our committee. Later on, after the meeting was over, I had two committee members come up to me and they said, you know, when you said that, the one guy said, I would have told him just to F off. And the other one said, I think he just did.
He just did.
Yeah.
So how you deliver the message.
Yeah, that's the diplomatic way of saying, take this and shove it.
Yeah. So,
give me paint the picture. And we do have pictures to do this, but I want to kind of paint it with words for a little while before we do it. Like, you know, Rick had a whole bunch of pictures of, like, the original, you know, rigs and you know, the lack of cell phones and communication back then. What was it like from your point of view, the communication aspect?
well, let me actually respond to that broader and take a step back. In approximately 1982, I was working at API. Mike Hildebrand and I both working at API, and we were both volleys at Berwyn Heights in Prince George County, which was a truck and a heavy squad. And the fire chief at that time, Chief Jim Estep, put together a task group whose charge was to look at the hazmat issue and provide the leadership with recommendations on how to move forward. So he put together this task group that had both career folks on and volunteer folks on. And we generated a report. And among the things that we generated, or among the comments, where we outlined 3 levels of response. Level 1 was essentially what we call operations level today. Level 2 response were 4 heavy rescue companies that we gave hazmat tech, they essentially tech capabilities. The tech standard wasn't out yet. And then level 3 was our hazardous materials response team, which wasn't assigned to a unit, but would be paged and go to the incident. And of the level 3 team, we also created team leaders. 3 of those team leaders were volunteer. 2 of the team leaders were career. The volunteer team leaders were myself, Mike Hildebrand, and Jim Yavora. And the other 2 career volunteers were George Bell and Chuck Thomas. And I got plenty of stories on Chuck Thomas in the hazmat world, which there's some good ones in there. But anyway, if you, with the benefit of looking back, we were a living leadership laboratory. I mean, the department asked, what do you think? And we told them, and they actually accepted everything that we laid out there. So we started with our first generation hazmat vehicle. There were 2 vehicles. One was a school bus that was divided where the front of the bus was like a command research area. And then we had equipment, including mostly our protective clothing and meters were in the backside. It was big, it was clumsy, but it did the job. It was a good first generation because we didn't know what we didn't know. And then associated with that was we had a stake body truck with a tarp over the back, and that's where we had like sorbents, overpacked drums, chlorine kits, and things like that. And it wasn't until about 3 years later we went to the second generation for us, which was a Hackney vehicle, the beverage size vehicle. So, but it wasn't pretty, but it was functional and it worked.
I can imagine that school bus must have had a tremendous amount of room on it. Like just to get it. Could you imagine, Bob, just getting a blank slate and like you build out the space? That would be that. I imagine it was much more functional than anything you could imagine nowadays.
So here's a quick one for you. So you can appreciate government at any level. So the bus has to be painted white, same configuration as the other vehicles. The bus goes out, it goes to a low bid vendor. So in the hazmat team, there's one of the guys is responsible for the bus. And we would ask him, where's the bus? And it got to the point where we didn't know where the bus was. So they took pictures of it, taped them on milk containers, and then started leaving them at fire stations. Like, if you see this bus, call.
Did they get called?
Yeah, how'd you find the bus?
How'd you find the bus? Oh,
well, that's how they got
funny.
the next vehicle. Because if they had found the bus, they would have never got a new vehicle.
Yeah.
Because that's government as well for
Well,
you.
that's like the old thing is like, well, this printer in the office doesn't work and they won't buy us a new one. I'm like, so I did this once. I just grabbed the thing, I smashed it on the floor. He said, what are you doing? I'm like, now they're going to buy us a new one.
Right. She's a broke. I don't know what happened.
She's not working so good.
Oh, all right. So reflecting back on your career, how has Hazmat, how has the management evolved from where you started to now?
Well, I think it's clearly, we were kind of like an adjunct responsibility in the early days. Today, it's viewed as a primary public safety discipline, and it's funded and supported at that level in most instances. So it's not a nice to do type of thing. It's something that we need to do. I think, though, that there's still different philosophies of what that mission looks like. I think if you look at those hazmat response organizations that we might call best in class, that they tend to view hazmat as more of a health and safety issue rather than just a chemistry issue, if you will. And health and safety, environmental health and safety from the broader sense,
Sure.
with a lot of reliance on air monitoring capabilities, our ability to assess issues, hazard and risk evaluation, yada, yada, yada.
All right. Paint the paint the picture of tools, innovations in tools. What you guys started with, like as far as pumps, as far as meters, like we have a gag shirt that the original meter was the canary in a cage, right? And that was a thing, and I know it was a thing. It was like back in the 20s, 30s, 40s when the miners would go down there, but like we see pictures of the meters from the 70s and 80s, and you compare them and contrast them with what's available today, where you really needed to know your job to utilize that meter and interpret its outputs, because the outputs were very limited. And now with, dare I say, AI, with digital screens, all these technologies that are now portable, it's almost like the training component of understanding your meter has faded a little bit.
I jokingly say that you can teach a monkey to use the meter. The tough part is, can you interpret what the meter's telling you? And that's ultimately, what the challenges are. one positive of 9/11 is that there was so much money thrown at the WMDC Bernie issue that Hazmat in general got brought along with the technology. So we've made quantum leaps in terms of our operational capabilities based
Literally.
on that.
Literally quantum. Like,
Yeah.
not even joking around. FTIR, ramen,
Yeah.
quantum leaps.
Hey guys, I'm give me a minute to grab my power cord because I'm getting the red bucket of death here.
Sounds
All
good.
right, well, we'll just take a quick break. Everybody, take 5. We're back. Better than ever.
Little bathroom
Greg's
break.
got some power.
A little bit of popcorn. Quick shout out to the Noll family. We know you're listening.
Question we were just discussing when we were coming back to the seat is it's a great question. I'll throw it out at you. If you had the opportunity of sitting down with for lunch with one of those guys, who would that guy be?
Eversole.
Really? Why?
You know, I didn't have brothers, but I loved John like he was a brother. And we were, you know, when you trace your career, a lot of our audience see us at the end of our career, or let's say the last third. When I met John, John was a lieutenant, and the story of John Eversole, the Hazmat responder / manager, was still in the process of being written. But I had so much fun with John and learned so much, and we fought so many battles together. Without a doubt, it's John.
That's
great.
Cool. That is cool.
We got a good question here. We got from Hugh Duncan. Was creating the NFPA codes easier or more challenging than writing the technician level textbook?
Ooh, well, I'll answer that on the premise that the technician level textbook is Hazmat managing the incident. So with that crass commercial, I would say the book was harder just because
spelling, right? That's how I feel.
Well, what made the book harder is that, we were starting with a blank page of paper. There were no standards, so it was kind of like saying, okay, Greg and Mike and Jim, what are your thoughts? Put them out there, send them out to the public, and see what your friends push back with. So intellectually, writing the book was harder. I would say, we would have conversations between, like, Mike and I, and Jimmy would say something, and I'd hear Jimmy out, and I'm thinking to myself, that's BS. Time and time again, Jimmy was proven right, and and I just stopped. It's like Pavlovian response. You get smacked enough, you realize that it's not worth raising. But Jimmy was such a godsend on the writing project because of his affiliation with Brady. The standards process, what makes it hard is what makes it effective. It's back to it's a full contact sport. It's articulating what your thoughts and perspectives are. It requires you to, in some cases, sell your peers over to your position. There's not always a right way or a wrong way. There's a lot of different ways. We work in a profession where you can do everything right and still have an ugly outcome. And you can do everything wrong and still have a positive outcome. And so how do you capture those elements into the standards process as well as into the training process? Good question. I probably didn't answer it directly, but gave some.
No. I got a personal question because I'm always intrigued with the evolution of PPE. And like I wasn't there when it was level A all the way, and I'm always intrigued with the evolution of how we went from level A's for just about everything to where we are now, where level A entries are really, really infrequent. I'm going to say relative. Is it because the suits are better? Is it because we're better trained? Is it because there's less hazmats, which we all know is not true? Take me from like when suits started coming out and the evolution up to where we kind of are today and the selection we have.
Well, if I go in the Wayback Machine, I'm working at API. I'm running at Prince George County, And wearing my API hat, I get involved in working on some projects through the Chemical Manufacturers Association. And these are the early years of what we know today as Transcare and a lot of the things that the industry did. And there was a guy named Jeff Stoll. Jeff was a Coast Guard officer, an engineer by trade. And Jeff was he was the guy that I leaned on when I had PPE questions. Now, if we fast forward to where we are today, you look at the NFPA CPC standards, Jeff's a name that you're going to see on there, as his career has evolved. But clearly, I don't know if in the stuff I sent you, I got asked to write an article. I'm going to say it was about 1982 for the IFC magazine on protective clothing for hazmat incidents. And I laid out, again, I'm starting with a clean page of paper. NFPA PPE standards are not out there. So, and we're still looking at level A, B, C from an EPA world as being for waste sites. So I had level 1 protective clothing with structural firefighting gear. It's what we use day in, day out. Level 2 was chemical splash. Level 3 was chemical vapor. And level 4 was thermal, primarily proximity suits like we used at that time in the ARF world, and with fire suits on top of that. And that was, today that seems so archaic, but that was, if you trace the thought process, that was kind of the starting point with a clean page of paper. Where we are today is just like with meters, PPE has had the advantage of being able to leverage off of all of the CBRNE WMD questions. We're so many generations above where we were for a long period of time.
There's a great question from a guy that lurks. I don't know who he is, but TB Metal Art. He asked, it's just a two-part question. Do you think today's chemicals are less hazardous than back in the day due to restrictions and regulations? We'll start with that one.
Well, I don't think that they're less hazardous, but I think that you have to acknowledge that regulations such as the Process Safety Management Standard and the OSHA regulations have led to improvement in the performance of safety in the chemical industry. And I use that broadly, both manufacturing and in transportation. But what has also happened is, and particularly in the last 4 to 5 years, is the expectations of the public have risen geometrically. What was an acceptable response in terms of our capacity and our timeliness 5 years ago is viewed as, in some quarters, as a failed response or at least a delayed response today. So the expectations of our customer base, the public at large, is significantly higher. A kind of radiation calls did you have back then? Very few and very far in between. So.
Now, was that just because there was no detection capabilities other than just, some really fundamental, rudimentary type, Ludlam systems or Geiger-Müller tubes? Yeah.
Yeah. So it goes back to the technology. And I would say that, if you had a nuclear power plant in your response area, then your expertise was certainly going to be a little bit higher. But, we didn't have not a lot of rad calls. And in most of the things that we went to were what you would expect. There were flammable liquids, flammable gases, throw in oxidizers, kind of those big 3 or 4 corrosives.
What was a particularly funny or memorable moment for you in your time with either the fire department or in your hazmat response, or even if there isn't one that lands in there, in your time teaching and instructing?
That's a loaded question, man.
I know.
It's all right. You're among friends.
There's a reason I'm hated.
So here's one. This is mid 80s. We get called to run a mutual aid call up north of the DC area between Baltimore and Washington. And the jurisdiction that we're being requested to run mutual aid, they didn't have a hazmat team at that time. So stop the movie right there for a moment. And over here, there's a parallel movie going where we're asking the leadership, can we get Nomex coveralls for the bomb squad? The bomb squad was part of the fire department. So bomb squad, hazmat technicians, yada, yada. And the leadership, said yes, we can get them, but they got to be after the first of the year in the next budget cycle. So now we're back to this incident. It's an 18-wheeler box trailer, multiple placards on the side. Incident started with the driver coming from one highway onto another. The load shifts. He sees in the back there's a vapor cloud coming off the back. We end up in the game. It's November. Incident starts about 8:30 in the morning. Tough incident in terms of risk assessment, because when we do the initial risk assessment, A plus B equal boom, A plus C equal boom, B plus C equal boom, and we already have a reaction that's taken place. So we work our way through the risk assessment. So now fast forward, it's about 7:30 at night. It's getting chilly. It's in November. They brought propane salamanders out to where the incident command post was for ambient heating. So now I'm standing by this propane salamander with Chuck Thomas, one of the other team leaders. And he walks away, and I'm standing there and I'm thinking, damn, this thing's really throwing out some heat. And I look down and my coveralls are on fire. And if you've never been on fire before, it's really inspirational. So
everybody came around you was like this.
Yeah.
So initially I do, kind of smack my coveralls, which doesn't do GOTS. So now I do stop, drop, and roll. And I get up and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, man, I hope nobody saw me. Unfortunately, it was Richard Pryor version 2.0.
Oh,
so now I get put in the ambulance and away we go. Not many people have seen this take place. So now imagine you're listening to the radio and you hear firefighter burns, 2nd and 3rd degree burns en route to Columbia Hospital. So now we get to the hospital, go into ER. And fortunately, I had blue jeans on underneath these polyester coveralls. So make no mistake, that was a positive. That was one for me. So the doc's looking at my hands and she says, Greg, no big deal. She says, oh, you got a couple 1st degree burns, couple little 2nd degree blisters. I said, Doc, you don't understand. The severity of my burns has nothing to do with the beating that I'm going to be taking from the people I work with. So this is in November. December is the hazmat team Christmas party. Everybody gets a gift, whether we like you or not. So my gift from the hazmat team was specially designed stationery that had a graphic across the top that showed 2 guys running down the street on fire and a banner that read the Greg Noll annual Learn to Burn Marathon Run.
Oh man!
You can't make this stuff up.
No, you can't.
That was straight. I thought you were going to say that the salamander lit the whole scene on
that's
fire.
exactly where I was going.
I thought that's where you were going with that. I was like, oh, here it comes.
Nah.
Oh,
So did you guys end up getting the Nomex jumpsuits?
You betcha, baby. And it wasn't after the first of the year. We got it within a couple of weeks. So as I like to say, hey, it would be one thing. The problem with that is many, many years later, I'm working an incident on a overturned 331 propane truck here in Lancaster. And I want to get a hold of a couple guys that I know with AmeriGas. And I call Mike Hildebrand up. And Mike and I are going back and forth, and where he gives me the information. And the last thing he says to me was, make sure you stay away from open flames. They never forget. They never forget.
Those are true friends. True friends. All right. So along those same lines, right? And this is stuff that we talk about on the show all the time, because the things that I mess up and my lessons in my career, people listening, they shouldn't make the same mistake. So this is a common question that we love to ask, love to talk about. What lessons have you learned the hard way during your time that has stayed with you? Things that were like, oops, I shouldn't have done that.
You know, I don't have a major oops scenario that I go back to. I think of going back and making mistakes. This isn't dealing with hazmat response, but I worked on a project when I was at API where we were making a video on gasoline tank truck emergencies, and API was freighting the bill for it. And so we did the filming at Texas A&M, and Texas A&M already had a 306 that they were using for their tank truck rollover course. And the game plan was we were going to use this new old truck and then burn up the one that they currently have. Well, when they got them side by side, it ended up that the one that we were bringing was older than the one they were already using, and the one they were already using met their needs. So, but we still got to burn one up. So, okay, we're going to have a fire. We're going to burn this tank truck up. My job is to make sure that whatever company logos are on that truck don't show up anywhere in the video. So it's generic truck. So we go through all of that and all is good. A couple months later, a package arrives from NFPA with marketing brochures on this video. The front page of the marketing piece shows the tank truck with the logos of Amoco on it. And I looked at that and it said, I'm going to get fired. This is a major league screw up. And I went up and, told Mike, and Mike talked to our vice president, and we talked to it ended up all the players were okay because the tank truck was going to get burned up anyway. But I thought for sure, that I was going to be done. I would say, if there's one thing about the attaboys, or not the attaboys, but doing something and getting it right, is the need to be more of a detective, particularly in your initial assessment process. The single largest cause of most incidents that we go to are people doing stupid things. And so if we acknowledge that that's going to happen, one of their priorities is that they may not, I'm not going to say they're going to lie to you, but they may not be forthcoming in a timely manner with all the incident facts. And so, playing that game to vet that information and run it to ground so that it's actually, it's accurate. The other, this is not a negative, this was just one of the things that we learned over time, is that you don't make big rock decisions on the basis of one reference source or one individual. We talked about the rule of threes, and when we originally coined the rule of threes, we were talking about going to 3 different books or reference sources. In today's world, that 3 could be 3 different air monitoring technologies. So you get weed out the false positives from the positives. But again, I recall an incident that we worked in Prince George, and we had the Beltway shut down. And I go to my boss, as the deputy chief was the incident commander for this incident, and I gave him my recommendations. And one of those recommendations were that we shut down the Beltway, all 6 lanes. And he came back with some concerns. And so, we got something that I felt comfortable with in terms of safety, and he was comfortable with in terms of infrastructure disruption. But then he asked a question. He asked me, who did I talk to and how did I arrive at that recommendation? And I went through and said, here's the bang, bang, boom, all the references that we checked, including live warm bodies. And then he said to me, look, if this thing goes bad, I want to have as many bloody fingerprints on the knife handle as possible, which was a nice way of saying that if we're going to get questioned, we want to make sure that we can validate the process that we went through to arrive at this recommendation. So rule of threes, to me, Hazmat 101, critical thinking skills.
This just in, the director just told me that Michael Hildebrand is saying that you left out the part where you burned up the good truck.
That is true. We burn up the good truck. Friends, you can always count on them.
Yes,
Yes.
jumping in just at the right moment. Thank you, Michael. I think that's been some of the best parts about doing the shows like these is having the guys, you know, the true friends
No
listening in the
friend.
audience, and they're like, "Oh, wait a second, hold on, it didn't quite happen like that," and call and yeah. Ah.
Hey, but serious for a moment. What with Mike calling in, Mike and I think complemented each other very well because Mike had some skill sets that I wasn't good at, and vice versa, and we made a great team. You know, I like to think, as we were talking the other week, that when we look back on our careers at that day when the final chapter comes, we can say it was a hell of a ride. We had a lot of fun, and hopefully we made a difference. So
I like it.
I would say you definitely have.
What was the most significant contribution to the field of hazmat since you've been in it? What do you think is like the track that is like has set the world on fire? Not literally.
You on fire.
I'm going to use 3 words: advocate, facilitator, collaborator. I think that we were advocates. No matter what we did, whether it was any of our writing skills, any of our consulting things, we were always an advocate for responder safety and the hazmat response community. At the end of the day, taking care of our people, not just bringing them home in the same physical and mental condition, but bringing them home from a behavioral perspective. That's the bottom line. So the first would be being that advocate for the people we work with and work for. The second one is being a facilitator. I think that because of our experiences, we were able to influence a lot of things that occurred over the years in our profession, both within hazmats and into the broader community. You know, a couple that I think of is the NFPA, writing the letters to NFPA for the development of the standard, along with Gene Carlson. The IFs, what we know today as the Baltimore Conference. That conference was originally the Rockville Conference, and who put it together were the metro teams in the Washington, D.C. area. We were a part of that. But when you look at what that conference started with and where it is today, it's amazing the impact that it's had. And I think we've been good collaborators. We've played nice in the sandbox, and you know, at the end of the game, it's never about us. It's moving the ball down the court, taking care of our people, hopefully giving them some tools in their toolbox. So,
Piggybacking off of that, what would be some of the how would you put it? I guess unresolved issues or challenges that you see that in the hazmat world that still need some attention and some focus.
Well, I don't think of a specific issue, but more of a process. We work in a dynamic environment, both as at a strategic level and at a tactical level. In simple terms, things are always changing, and what's an acceptable standard of care today may not be an acceptable standard of care tomorrow. Just look at the changes that we've seen in the energy industry, whether you're looking at carbon fuels or you're looking at batteries, and that's not static. I think one of our challenges is that we need to have emergency preparedness as a key element to evaluate in management of change. As we're making these decisions in management of change with respect to new products, new technology, emergency preparedness has to be one of the questions that we're looking at. It obviously wasn't done on when we look at some of the battery scenarios that we look at today, where the emphasis has been, let's push it out into the market. And then when something goes bad, it's like, well, gee, what's plan B or plan C? Should have been thinking about plan A, B, and C when it was still in the design phase.
When you say that, when you say we, are you referring to the first response community, or are you referring to the manufacturers? Because I guess I'm not going to say government officials, but the market pushed the batteries out, and then there were problems, and we just responded to them. Are you saying that you feel like we could have played a bigger role in figuring this out before they came to market?
I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but I think the question should have been asked, and it should have been asked earlier rather than later. And again, I don't see that as an emergency response. If they're not asking us, we probably don't know it. But in their decision-making process, they should be asking those questions. If then what?
Right. That makes sense.
Good question came in from Bernie Welch. What's the most significant event that's happened that changed Hazmat?
Well,
I'm guessing like a love canal or a, like a bow pole or something like that.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say Bhopal and Institute West Virginia, because those directly led to Sarah Title III, which raised the community issues. So I would say those are probably two incidents that come to mind on a macro level.
Just out of curiosity for myself, everybody mentions Bhopal and Love Canal and all these things. Were they seriously, because I wasn't in that zone back in that day, were they that big of a deal, or were they just big enough to get attention and therefore everybody uses those as milestones?
I don't know what the numbers are in terms of fatalities and injuries from Bhopal, but it's a big number. There's a lot of zeros behind that number. So that clearly was on the radar screen. But then the discussion here domestically was, well, that's in India. It could never happen here. And right after that, we have Institute West Virginia. And so different size, different scale, but it certainly it questioned the current line of thinking, if you will.
What was the West Virginia event? I apologize. I'm not familiar with it.
Institute West Virginia was MIC. I'm getting a dumb attack on the product, but it was essentially a poison gas. And there was a release that went into the community. There were community impacts. So, but the other thing was the timing. It was shortly thereafter following Bhopal.
Okay.
So.
Interesting.
I'm looking it up real quick.
Were those types of things, like when events like that happened? Actually, when was Bhopal? 84?
84.
84. So you guys so the standards were started in 85. Were these things that were actually like the breakdown of the events that happened, would they be referenced in creating these standards as far as what hazmat technicians should know and how they should respond? Like, did they just get the ball rolling for government officials to kind of step in and say, oh, this is important, we're going to fund it?
Well, they didn't throw much money at it in terms of funding, but I would say that it accelerated the timeline of recognition of the issue. This wasn't a one-off. And keep in mind, these two incidents were focused on fixed facilities. You still have the day-to-day transportation issues that were ongoing as well. So
I did find it. It was August 11th, 1985, methyl isocyanate.
Yeah.
So how many of these things are floating around with your name on it?
Well, I usually say mathematics, there's a lot, and a shitload.
Right.
So
I'm going to go with shitload because not for nothing, but I don't think there's a hazmat book that I have. There's maybe 3 hazmat books that I have that don't have your name on them somewhere on the book. So how did you get into the world of writing? I mean, yes, granted you had the textbook, but was it a vacancy that you filled, or was it a vacancy that people came to you and was like, hey, we need this?
so let me say first of all that Sister Paula Marie gets a lot of credit. She was my 12th grade English teacher, and Mike had a similar experience with, I forget his English teacher's name, but same experience. I would say it was in the early days, when we did our initial writings, it was just trying to capture. One of the things that Mike and I do well is we can write. We're not the most experienced folks. We're not the smartest folks, but we do a pretty good job of taking information and packaging it in a way that makes it useful to a user. The other part of the equation was Jim Yavoro. I mean, Jimmy's really the guy that makes it all come together in terms of the quality of our products. So we didn't get pushed into it. It was crawl, walk, run. We started with writing articles, and some of those articles got packaged into booklets, and then we floated them out there. And people like yous would say, "Hey, this is good stuff," or they'd say, "Hey, this is good, but you know, if you do this, it can be even better." And so, it wasn't like it wasn't an ego issue. It goes back to that advocate for emergency responders and keeping those responders safe. So we could write, and the rest, as they say. And then some of those projects we didn't seek out. People came to us and said, hey, can you do propane and pipeline emergencies are classic examples where they came to us and said, we like your stuff. Would you be interested in, doing a book that's product specific or container specific?
Very nice.
And,
I love it.
And, just a couple broad comments. When you write, people think you're a lot smarter than you really are.
The same thing happens when you
laundry,
the same thing happens when you put a microphone in front of somebody. Like,
so true.
So we had good friends. I'll use Bill Hand. Bill Hand was one of our sounding boards, and we would talk to him, or we'd send him something, say, Bill, what do you think? And he would provide us his feedback. And Mike always uses the term that we were the secretary for responders. And, there's a lot of truth to that.
I got a series of photos that you sent in that I'd like you to just kind of paint the picture with some photos. And this is one of the favorite parts of mine. And I know people that watch, they like taking a little walk. So what is this?
World Trade Center, Saturday, whatever that date is, North Tower. We get assigned. We're working in that area, and it's an elevated area, and the battalion chief that we're working for asked if we can get a dog up into this area, and we say, sure. What we always say, yeah, we can do that. And then it's like, how would you do that? But anyway, Riley was one of our dogs, and we put him into a Stokes basket. He was carried up to the area where we were working. And then when the response was done, we put him in a Stokes basket and shipped him high angle back over onto the West Street side of the incident.
Was that at night?
No, it was Saturday afternoon, but it was one of those incidents, guys, where it was showstopper. I mean, everybody just stopped who could see that, and we're pointing, and it was such in a day where so much ugly things were taking place. It was a good picture. And if you go to the museum, in New York. The last time I was there, Riley's picture was in a prominent place.
I was gonna say, I feel like I've seen this picture before, or has this picture been published?
Yeah, it's been around.
Okay.
And I'm tough to see, but I'm right at Riley's head in the white helmet and the gray shirt.
Okay.
A question I was thinking of, what kind of stuff would you ask, was one of them was, what would I regard as the top 3 incidents that I've been to in my career? And the reality is none of them are hazmat incidents per se. The trade center's at the top of the list, followed by probably Katrina, followed by the Amish school shooting in 2006, where I got involved in from an incident management team perspective. Lots of hazmat stuff after that, but that's, in terms of their impact on me and my takeaways, those are probably the big 3.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Oh man. So you talk about busting chops. This is right before I'm leaving Prince George, where Mike and I are starting Hildebrand and Noll. So if you think about it, the Rockville conference is going on in the same time frame. It was like I was getting my chops busted for 4 consecutive days. So day 1, I go to where the conference hotel, and I'm in a meeting, and I get paged out for a pneumonia incident. I come out to my fire department vehicle, and it's wrapped in toilet paper. There's rocks in the hubcaps. So before I can go on this call, I got to get all this crap off of my car. Friday, they put together wanted posters. And the wanted posters have a front and side picture of me. And then they go on to take every screw up that I ever had. And it's in a running narrative, like it's a description, bow-legged, straight, talks in strange Yankee dialect, yada, yada, yada. Well, these are not limited to the conference hotel. They're in like restaurants around the conference and that stuff. So the shirts are Saturday. I go to the conference, and there are people are wearing these shirts. Says Greg Who in the front, and in the back it's my picture, and it's slashed out. That wouldn't be bad, but people I don't even know are wearing these shirts. So I come home that night.
They're being worn by your children now.
They are. That's the truth is there. Hey, Kendra, you need to turn this off and go back to doing mommy stuff. Yeah? So anyway, I go home. My wife's upstairs, and she says, "So what did they do to you today?" I said, "You wouldn't believe it. They had these shirts. Some people I didn't even know were wearing these shirts." And she says, "Come here a minute." She opens up her robe, and she's wearing one of the shirts and says, "Did it look anything like this one?" Well, you would think it would end there. The next year, our youngest son, Sean, he's 2 years old. They give him a shirt. His shirt says Daddy Who in the front with my picture slashed out. So, hey, great team there. Great team. One of the highlights of my career, if not my life. When you work with a group of people who are very good at what they do across the board, it's an experience to be cherished. And that was my experiences both in USAR and in Prince George. It sounds corny, but good things happen when good people get together. And if you don't care who gets the credit, man, you can do a lot. This was the first major hazmat team incident that we had in Prince George. And it was a 331 bobtail overturned. Obviously, you can see there, it's kicking. The initial reported size up by the battalion chief was essentially, we have an impending levy situation. What's missing in this picture is that where you see that U-Haul truck right behind that were like 6 to 8 bus loads of kids. And they were just sitting there watching what's going on. And so when Mike and I got to the incident, it was probably 45 minutes into the incident. and they were just getting that traffic out of the way because at that time our team was divided up in shifts. So depending upon what shift was on, you would take the lead for the incident. So Mike and I are coming to the incident, and we go to the command post and get with the hazmat guys. And, I asked, okay, so who got the team? And what do you want us to do? And they all looked at me and essentially said, you got it. I said, what have you guys been doing? They said, we've been dealing with this, up to this point. So, and, just the guy in the middle there is Chuck Thomas. Jimmy Yavora is off to the left-hand side there. I just want to, I was with Chuck last week, and you talk about, this is indicative of the caliber of these people. Chuck Thomas worked in Prince George County for 10 years and always wanted to fly airplanes. And at 10 years, he vested his pension, and he went and he got hired by United Airlines, and he spent the next 30 years flying airplanes.
Wow.
And what a career. We were together last week at a national meeting on hazmat rail issues. And, he has such a unique perspective because he marries the fire service experiences on the street with the decision-making experiences as a captain of a major aircraft. So
I got speaking of trains.
Well, that's a picture that, quite frankly, every hazmat technician should know where it is and what it means. It's Waverly, Tennessee, which from a damage assessment of pressurized containers is one of the case studies that every hazmat technician should be familiar with. I won't get down into the weeds, but the end of this incident, Mike had worked at NTSB at the same time this incident took place and had access to looking at a lot of the documentation and the transcripts. But this was an incident that when the initial derailment took place, it was on a snowy day, ambient temperature in the 20s and so forth. You can see there right in the middle of the tank car in the foreground that there's a kind of a gouge across the tank. The next day, the ambient temperature rose up into the 40s, I believe it was exactly. So combined gas law, common volume, you increase the external temperature, internal pressure is going to go up. The container ripped open, no relief valve activation, simply opened up. There were approximately 10 fatalities, including the police chief and the fire chief.
Wow.
Wow,
So
that's an incident. Holy crap.
Yeah, and again, this takes us back to critical thinking, critical analysis, understanding benders, and how the GEBMO applies into this. But again, every hazmat technician should be familiar with that incident.
And it tore right at that gouge.
Yeah, as you guys know, typically when we look at the rail cars over the years, they split into 3 to 5 major pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, let's see this one. What is this?
This was one of the things that I mentioned earlier, that the bomb squad was in the fire department in Prince George's County. So I'm the guy getting in the suit here. But what we started was, where we ended up was we had a couple incidents where it was a bomb squad incident, but it involved reactive chemicals. So rather than taking it on an incident by incident case, we just started to alert the hazmat officer of any bomb squad calls, so that we had that, both the explosive device and the hazmat expertise at the incident scene right from the get-go. So I think it made us a better team in a lot of different ways. But
the course training's got to make you a little bit more polished, or at least it means your span of I don't want to say interpretation, but your span of appraisal is probably more broad when you're seeing things from different lenses.
Yeah, and again, this was based on a couple incidents where we went into the bomb squad was already operational, and now you're coming in and they're trying to bring you up to date. It just made a lot more sense that we'll bring out both parties at the get-go so that from a size-up process, we have that hazmat input marrying into the explosive device input on the front end. And to be honest, there were a lot more bomb squad calls than there were hazmat calls at some point. So it was nice to be busy.
How about this one?
That's the at the propane tank truck that I showed you a little bit earlier. So you got Mike there on the right, Jimmy Yavor in the middle, and my longer hair and brown hair in there on the side. And again, this was not, from a hazmat technician perspective, this was not a hard incident in terms of size up. There, you only had so many options. You had pressurization on the tank car, PRVs blowing, so high probability of it belevying, which it eventually never did. But it was, while it had high risk factors, it was an easy incident in terms of looking at what our options were. And this did so much in selling the capability of the hazmat team to the rest of the department. Because, positive outcome. And some of the other things that we did at this incident was we knew through some contacts that we had with the Phoenix Fire Department, some personal connections, some friends, that they recently had a bobtail similar to this. We called them up on the phone and said, hey, this is what we got. We know you just had this. What can you tell us? One of the other things was we brought in another bobtail just from it's identical to the one that's involved, so that we can look at, okay, what do we think that's going on here? So it's a lot easier to communicate, that assessment process when you're looking at an identical container.
That's a great takeaway.
That is.
And another thing is, this incident this was a high profile incident. It was a week after the Labor Day weekend. It was only 2 exits from the Route 50, which is the beach exit, if you will, off of the Beltway. The governor had the head of the state police fly to the incident to get a personal report from Chief Estep as the incident commander. So from a political sense, not in terms of partisan politics, but in terms of organizational dynamics, there were a lot of issues there. And the Beltway ended up, it was closed for, as I recall, approximately 17 hours at that point.
So the fire that we saw in that original picture, was that coming from the pressure reducing device, or was that the fire that was impinging on the vehicle?
No, that was the relief valve was blowing. And as I recall, it was on the liquid side. So we were pushing out liquid. So that accounts for the much larger plume that you see there.
I'll go back to that. I'm really curious about this one.
So there's a photo in our basement of that picture there. And when the kids were smaller, their friends would say, "Did your dad play for the Phillies?" So here's another story. I went to Dream Week with the Phillies in 1984, and I paid a lot of money to be a kid for a week. I had a lot of fun, and things that I remembered that I used to be able to do, I either couldn't do at the same speed, strength, or couldn't do them at all. But that being said, how does it tie into hazmat? Well, in Dream Week on Saturday, you play the pros, the real guys. So we're in Florida, and Eversol's in Florida. And I know John is coming to when we play the pros on Saturday. So Monday night, they have this draft, and they assign you to teams. Tuesday, you come in, they have a roster there with the different teams. And the teams are called like the Mariners, the 89ers, and the Beavers. The Beavers is one of them. So I know Eversol's coming, and I'm thinking defensively, please don't put me on the Beavers, because that's like I'm giving him bullets to shoot at me. And I come in, Greg Noll, the Beavers. It's like, oh, God. So now we fast forward to Saturday. Eversole and another guy from the NFPA committee at that time, Bill Stringfield, they're in the audience. So, I mean, it's just like going to Yankee Stadium. Now batting number 14, playing first base, Greg Noll. I'm walking out, and all I hear is Eversole. Let's go, Bucky! Come on, Bucky and the Beavers! So he never ends.
I love it. I got a couple more here. I love this. All right, I'm curious about this one. This one is adorable.
That's from the Amish school shooting. And those are all little Amish kids. And on the shooting was on a Monday. We got involved a little bit on the shooting day, but from a response perspective, it was a high intensity, short duration event on day one. On Wednesday, they asked our incident management team to come in and provide them with support to get ready for the funeral services. On Saturday, the parents of the kids are now meeting with counselors and that stuff. And I said to my oldest son, Sean, I said, I want you to come with me. Let's go down there. So I went down to check in, and they got all the kids together, and they were taking them for rides on the fire truck. And in Amish customs, typically they don't want their picture to be taken, but that wasn't the case with the kids. So this was just one of those moments where, in what is a terrible week, no matter how you cut it, there are things that bring a smile to your face, and this was one of them. And later on, this was in October, the following summer, the Amish community held a picnic for all the responders who were involved in the incident. State police, the IMT, the hospital personnel, both field providers and facility providers. And it was such a neat day to go back. It was like going back in time to a picnic 30 years ago on an Amish farm with the kids around. It's just, as I said, it's on my 3 lists of incidents. It was a terrible day, but amidst all that terror, there's still some things that bring a smile to my face.
Humanity still punches through.
Yeah. Mike Hildebrand and Ludi Benner. And, as I said, Ludi is such a profound impact, in my opinion, on the Hazmat community, and really the father of risk-based response when you really break it down from an analytical perspective.
I wonder if it would be possible, I'd love to know more about him, having studied some of his stuff and trying to teach it in class. I wonder if it would be possible to have you, Mike, and maybe 1 or 2 other guys that really knew him, and have an AARP about him that is just kind of going through and honoring him as for who he was, and sharing what he did for our community and bringing us to where we are now.
I think that's a great idea, Mike. And a name I would add on to that is Charlie Wright as well. Because Charlie was, when Charlie was at the University of Maryland, and then he went on to a long career with the railroads at UP. But he another one of those translators, as I mentioned about Mike as well.
That'd be great.
That's a good idea. We'll have to get that together. I'm thinking about how to do that. We'll have to have all 3 of you guys on, and then we can have you guys on together. Interesting. Michael Hildebrand says, I'm in, and Charlie Wright too.
All right. That was easy.
That was easy. Okay.
That was the easiest booking yet.
Button.
Thank you. You're the best. All right. Got a couple more here. I just want to put up what is this?
Okay. This is Katrina. And we were doing a survey of an area, and those chlorine content cylinders were scattered around in this particular area. And I use this because it's kind of caveman hazmat response. So, I mean, we're in a ravaged area. We're walking along, and we smell chlorine. So we look around, and there's these cylinders that are scattered around in different positions in that. So we go on the upwind side and we evaluate it, and then we say, okay, there's a one cylinder. The water is crystal clear around its head, so you can tell that's where the leaker was. It's purifying the water. So we reached down, we shut off the cylinder valve, stood them up, took a GPS, and kept on going. Now, the question that when we came home and said, okay, if you took that scenario in a normal day, that would have been a hazmat box assignment. You would have had XYZ resources that would have responded. But in this particular case, you assessed the problem, you understood the risk, and you took actions that made the problem go away, and we kept on rocking and rolling. So it's one of those, for the hazmat techs, it was like, yeah, I get it now, So that was just a shot from the Amish school shooting when we were assisting the incident management team there. And as I said, this is highlights isn't the right word. It's one of my experiences that I cherish. And in my house, I was asked to, along with one of our other members of the IMT, who was a medic, to facilitate the AAR with the responders. And after that was over, there was a painter, a woman who painted a picture of the schoolhouse with kids that the original is hanging in the state police barracks that was first on scene. And they made photographs of that artwork, and they gave me one of those photographs. So it was pretty special.
Well, let's wrap it up on this one.
You asked a question about what are the most significant things you've done, and you guys know Chris Aguirre, who's retired out in Miami, and Hazmat IQ, and Chris was a guy. I've heard him say several times that in the first part of his career, he was working on his resume, and the back part of his career, he was working on his eulogy. And there's so much truth to that. And my takeaway is that when I look back Mike and I have had great careers. Objectively, you can say we did some pretty neat things, and hopefully we moved the ball down the court. All those things are important, but I'll tell you, the thing that I value the most of all my accomplishments, there's really two. The first one is each one of my kids have told me at some point in time that I was their hero. And the second thing is that in our position as, I think it's fair to say we're change agents. We've influenced the business, but it's the second and third generation that we've helped, and to watch them go on and succeed. I'm blessed with my kids. My daughter Kendra, she's a mother of three. My youngest son Ian, who's a career firefighter down in Virginia, and coincidentally just got transferred to a hazmat station. So, and then my oldest son Sean, who's that's an older picture. He's a Major 04 with the Marine Corps. So
That's
it's been
Very nice.
And the one that's missing there is my wife, because my wife,
She's a saint.
my wife is, she's not on here, I hope. My wife, I clearly married up and she married down, but she's 100% Sicilian, and she's the female equivalent of a junkyard dog when she gets fired up. And me and the boys, we're on the other side of the fence running back and forth with the stick. But at the end of the day, that dog always wins, She is a saint. Yep, I would agree.
My grandmother was full Sicilian, so
I always say that she's the Italian grandmother without the black dress. So,
Mike, I gotta say, do you mind if we share your email address in case people have follow-up questions on that?
absolutely, no problem.
All right. So I gotta say, I thoroughly enjoyed tonight. It was tremendous. I honestly, every one of these shows is bringing a little bit back to the community. I'm hoping the newer generation sits and listens to these shows and takes a little something back and puts it into the jar. And, it's not, I learned it's not, you don't learn your way from one guy. You learn a little bit from Greg and a little bit from Mike and that becomes Bob's way. So hearing these stories and hearing the formative things and why we do what it is, it's important in the development of the new technician and even operations level guy to hear these stories and just kind of immerse yourself in it.
Yeah. Hey, one final story. You mentioned Phil. I was at the National Fire Academy for the pilot of the operating site practices course. This is circa, I don't know, 95 or around there. And Phil's one of the instructors. And I still remember Phil was going through the slides and somebody says, Phil, you're going so fast, we can't read the slides. To which I responded, read the slides. Hell, I can't even tell what color they're on. He's going through, he's like,
yeah, it sounds like Phil.
Yeah.
Greg, tremendous work. And we are actually, tomorrow I'm going to be reaching out. I might be reaching out to you to get the contact information from Mike and Charlie, but they're definitely going to be on the list. We're trying to do at least one of these shows a month. I have a feeling now that we got the methodology settled out, we might be able to kick it up maybe once every 3 to 4 weeks, because there's a lot of you OGs out there that I kind of want to get you guys on film and share these things, like the Ludwig Benner. Like he's not here anymore, but the fact that we have 3 guys that were with him we could have him
we could have him.
you. That's a brilliant move. So maybe we can even do those kind of things and shift it up. And if anybody out there has any inputs or needs or wants or thoughts about this whole thing, please email us at info at the Hazmat guys, and it's going on the list because we want it as much as you do.
And guys, let me tell you, this has been more fun than I thought it could be. And the time went so fast because I was
really
thinking,
did.
But Don Abbott, God bless his soul, he did a survey a number of years ago, probably 7-8 years ago, and he
right?
Yep. Well, actually, originally Indiana, Wayne Township, Indiana. Or is it Warren Township, Indiana? But he did a survey and he asked hazmat responders different questions, and one of those were kind of, who do you see as the most influential folks in the hazmat business? Number 1, Eversole. Number 2, Ron Gore. Number 4, Mike Callan. Number 3, as long as I was higher than Callan, I was okay.
Mike Callan, going back on Mike Callan was the first guy, and he was like, I didn't know what to expect. And I keep telling everybody, just watch the previous guys. That's the kind of flow. It's just like we're sitting around, we're having a beer, we're just laughing and talking about the way it was, and we're trying to funnel from social media all the comments that these guys are throwing in and giving it to you, and I hope it's a comfortable show. Yeah. So that's what our goal is.
And can I share a Callan story?
Absolutely.
So way back in the Wayback Machine, Mike and I were part of a team that was doing initial hazmat training for New York State Chiefs as part of their road show. And we went to, including on the island, both in Nassau and Sussex. And I think it was Nassau County. I mean, everybody knows what a great instructor Mike is. But Mike had some equipment malfunctions on his slides and that. And to the point where there was some lobbying to terminate the class. And Ed McCormick stood up for Mike and said, no, Mike, you comfortable with going in? And Mike knocked the ball out of the park in the afternoon session. But I tell you that story because we think about Mike and what a great instructor he is. But all of us have good days and bad days. And how do you bounce back from your bad day? that could have devastated many instructors. And Mike took it, and just the rest, as they say,
Well,
is history.
if
And I just had the opportunity to be there and watch it.
he, he's still very active in the conference circuit, and he is very often standing room only in his classes. So yeah,
Well, I'll even give you a little insider baseball. We're finishing up getting another show on the road where he, once every X amount of months, is going to do a kind of a walkthrough of a case study of a major hazmat incident, and kind of do a wrap up from the beginning, like, Bhopal and like you said, what was it, intervention, West Virginia Institute. Like, he's going to pick one, we're going to do the case study on it, and we're going to have a discussion on it and have pictures. And so he's still very involved in things, and we're looking to get more involved with him because he's a tremendous asset. And why wouldn't you? He's a nice guy too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you once again on behalf of the entire social webs and everything. You're going to be able to listen to this forever. So just go onto the Facebook or YouTube or whatever and check it out. Greg, thank you so much for coming on.
Mike and Bobby, thank you for the invite. I as an old guy, I sincerely appreciate that you asked me. So,
well, we appreciate that you said yes.
Yes.
so
All right, guys. We'll see you next
okay,
month.
brothers.